In the new Player's Handbook, I counted just 17 pieces of art featuring white dudes as the subject. Guess how many in the other categories there were?
I love this place!
Well, I went through the 2024 D&D Player's Handbook, page by page, and documented the character-focused artwork to see if it could provide just a little bit of insight into who Wizards of the Coast thinks that their target market is. The results were, even to these wide-open eyes, a tad shocking. I'll get to those in just a few moments. But to understand the current environment, let me lay the groundwork just a little, if you will. Suppose we have two people. One is a huge basketball fan, and the other knows absolutely nothing about the sport and hasn't watched 1 second of an NBA game. The fan, wanting to introduce the sport to his friend, begins to show him all the things he loves about the sport. He shows him highlight reels, pictures, and talks about all of his favorite players. Every day he shows his friend these same images to get him pumped up to finally watch a game when the season starts. So finally the day comes and they watch their first NBA game together, and the players walk out on the court and the newcomer to the game is a little bit confused. It's a fine game and all, and he enjoys it, but he obviously notices that a large majority of the players happen to be black and not white. He tells the super fan that he loves the game but is a little bit confused. Going solely on the view of the sport he got earlier, he would have thought it was mostly played by white guys. Now, what if, in blatant defiance of the facts, that superfan indignantly responded by saying that the majority of those players were indeed white? How dare he suggest otherwise? Deliberate gaslighting. Well, how would you respond to something like this? By pointing to the evidence and telling him just to open his eyes? Well, what if you did, and he still doggedly refused? And by the way, you could do the photo negative version of this example by simply swapping out the NBA for the NHL. The colors don't really matter. It's the blatant denial of reality that does. For the last several years, Wizards of the Coast and the Seattle RPG companies have foisted a lie upon the public. They want the world to believe that white people are no longer the majority of players in this hobby.
This is not the face of the hobby anymore. And I think there's been mistakes made in years past where people assumed that D&D players were all, white dudes in a basement, which has been a faulty assumption for a lot of years and gets more and more false every day.
They say it as if they can almost will it into being, and they reinforce it with the branding and the artwork associated with D&D, especially the new 2024 Player's Handbook. Yet this all belies reality. There is a great video by the YouTuber RPG Elite, who is an African-American gamer. I'll link to it in the description of this video. In it, he details the 4 main reasons he believes that role-playing and D&D have never really caught on in the black community. Now, much of it would seem like common sense once you hear it. And let me say, I trust his take on this issue much more than I do the exclusively white, woke Seattle RPG mafia. Now, some of you may take exception to some of the reasons he gives, but what is indisputable is the conclusion. RPGs are something that have just not been embraced by the black community. I went to Gen Con this year for the first time as a YouTuber. I was keeping an unofficial tally of the minority representation there. At a convention of 80,000 people, I saw perhaps 20 to 25 black men. I saw maybe 4 or 5 black female attendees. That's it. Now, I'm sure you can do the math, which leads to an infinitesimal small result. I'm also sure the leftists in the RPG community will make excuses for this, such as, they're too poor, or they're just not knowledgeable enough of these conventions, or it's not safe for them there. Lefties just love speaking for the black community like they're mentally deficient children. It's all nonsense, of course. The reason there's not a higher percentage of African Americans in the RPG hobby is that they are choosing to do other things of their own free will. There's no artificial barrier to entry. The hobby is and always has been welcoming to everyone. But it's also not the fault of those already in the hobby if people choose not to participate. The really insidious thing is that the Seattle RPG companies, as I exposed in an earlier video, are lily white. Almost zero black employees working on their RPGs in a significant role. Yet these hypocrites insist that the gaming world is changing. Their favorite whipping boy, the white male, is no longer a majority according to them. And again, I would just urge you to look at some of my Gen Con diary streams, where I walk the vendor hall to easily refute this lie that they continue to propagate. White males make up still a large portion of the gaming world. Now, Wizards of the Coast essentially vandalized their own core rulebook to fit this square peg into a round hole. I went through the new 2024 Player's Handbook and did a little experiment. I did a count of all the character-driven art pieces. In it, I counted the ones that featured us white dudes, as they derisively call us. And trust me, I was being very generous. Some of these guys weren't exactly dripping with the toxic masculinity that they accuse us all of having. But still, I counted them as part of team patriarchy. And on the other side, I counted the ones that featured white women, black men and black women, and all the various flavors of furry. The results? In the new Player's Handbook, I counted just 17 pieces of art featuring white dudes as the subject. Guess how many in the other categories there were? Well over 100. 5 times as many. It is patently absurd. Why? To paraphrase the legendary Sherlock Holmes, what is the meaning of it? What object is served by this circle of misery and fear? It's not a coincidence. It's a deliberate act, of course.
When we got the descriptions, they were very adamant. They were like, try not to make it like a white blonde guy. Like, please, like we love them, but there's like 500 million of them.
The diversity that the characters need to have needs to reflect the gaming world now.
The mix of people that are playing these games, it's not 13-year-old white boys held up in their basements. It's a very diverse crowd,
Why are they so ashamed of their core audience while simultaneously and hypocritically employing almost no real minorities in their companies? Is it because there aren't any minority employees to hire to begin with? If so, that presents quite the paradox for them, no? Minorities taking over an industry, yet them not being able to employ any in a position of real influence. Is it the white savior complex? Are smart, college-educated white liberals telling all those poor, unfortunate blacks that their self-selection of hobbies is wrong? I actually do believe that this is a large part of it. Up until the last couple years, I would have never thought even they could be so arrogant, but yes, I actually do now believe that. There's also a sense of self-loathing involved. Our education system and culture have twisted too many people into believing that they should be ashamed of their immutable characteristic of being born white. To the people who fall prey to this, I name you for the fools that you are. For those who willfully push this belief, and this would include Wizards of the Coast, Paizo, Green Ronin, and the rest of the woke RPG crowd, I wish nothing but the worst for you. I hope you drive more and more people away with this ridiculous, pandering, and uninspiring artwork. I hope more and more young Gen Z men who are getting tired of being demonized at birth for the sin of being born white and male, I hope they turn their backs on you. You deserve to be vilified for despising your core audience, to pursue one that simply does not exist. There's a place here in the hobby for everyone. Everyone that wants to embrace the game that Gary and Dave made. But when some people choose not to participate, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. Getting back to my opening parable, the NBA isn't making a public push to increase the number of white players in the NBA beyond the existing 17%, are they? White athletes may choose other sports or are simply not good enough to make it there. And that's okay. People understand this. It's not a cause for concern any more than the NHL being over 90% white. You can enjoy both sports without the need to artificially inject equity into it. People of free will are going to go where they will find the most enjoyment and success. So too with RPGs. Welcome anyone who wants to play with open arms, of course. But don't vilify people for not playing when it's not their cup of tea. And certainly don't blame your existing audience for those people not playing. And don't make fools of yourself in the fruitless pursuit of this non-existent market.